Welcome to Hot Bananas. We have our latest episode. We will talking about a sensitive topic, but also a very dynamic and important theme for art students out there. And we are discussing death in culture and creativity. So quite a big theme. And so this show is about histories and contexts. So it's a bit of like an improvised history or art history show. And the format follows in 3 parts. So for the first half hour, we will have 3 guests talk about their social objects or the signifier. So an object, a thing to tell a story for. And then the 3 of them will have a chance to have a conversation about what they've talked about or the ideas that they've shown. And then maybe I might prod them to ask the question, so what? Like, what do we do with these interesting chats? And what happens if we put that in a creative blender? And so our guests, I've called them the good mornings, trying to just keep it playful, which is in keeping with what we do with Hot Bananas. Our guests are Amy, Tassos, and Shannon. They have their job titles as seen, different creative ways of dealing with humans, really. And so we'll hear from them shortly. So once again, thanks for joining us, Amy, Tassos, and Shannon, and over to you.
Great. Should I go first?
Yes.
I have some slides. I'm not. How do I? Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Just share
it. Remind me how to.
At the bottom, there should be share screen.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, great. Thank you. So bear with me. Apologies. Okay, I'm sorry for being a bit slow. So I wanted to talk about, this has just been a really interesting topic for me because I actually have always been really interested in horror films, ghost stories, all of this kind of thing, sort of ghostly haunted houses and things. And I've never really had a very good explanation because people do ask, why do you like this stuff if they're not into it? And I've never had any kind of answer for that made any sense to me. And I don't really know why I like it so much. And just thinking about sort of presenting and talking about this here, it really took me on a bit of a journey of sort of thinking about that in a different way, which came about because the first thing that came into my mind thinking about death was the death card from tarot. And just on the left here, I'll sort of pull this up in a bit as well, but I actually have a tarot pack, which is dragons. I got that when I was about 8-9 years old. My mum had one. She used to do readings on New Year's, sort of special occasions. Neither of us, we're both a bit skeptical. We're sort of a skeptical family, but she's always put a lot of belief in that. And I sort of picked that up from a young age. I've never really treated my tarot cards with anything less than quite a lot of respect. I've always sort of felt that they had a certain amount of sort of meaning and power and a certain amount of personality. So the first thing I thought when I thought about death is, well, I said, there's a death card in my tarot pack, which I haven't looked at in about 20 years, I think. And I pulled that out and just had a bit of a think. It's the first time I've handled them in a really long time. And the death card, obviously, well, not obviously, but it means change. It doesn't mean the Grim Reaper coming around the corner. It means something in your life ending and something else beginning. So it's quite a positive card in some ways. And I was thinking, well, we all go through these. We're all sort of placing the death card in our lives all the time, really, because we're always having different things in our lives end and other things begin. And the upside down version of the death card actually means something else. If you place the card upside down when you're doing a reading, that means resistance to change, refusing to move forward, stagnation. Always felt in tarot readings that one was sort of shaking its finger at you a little bit. It felt a bit, so it was sort of saying you ought to accept change and not hold back, because that leads to sort of dependency and being unwilling to move forward. But the thing I sort of realized while I was thinking about all of this is that that's actually a card or an idea or a place that we sort of spend time in that's actually got a great deal of opportunities for people to be creative. It's a sort of place where creativity is sort of born, really. I wanted to talk a bit about that. I think when we do go through changes in life, we don't automatically click our fingers and move into a new period of our lives. There's always sort of a period of time where we have to kind of process change, process things that we've lost. And in a way, and I know this is a sort of theory to do with mourning, we're sort of tied to things in our lives, all the way from people that we love right down to, you know, your favorite tea. And when things disappear from your lives, you still have those strings, in my mind, thinking visually, to sort of tie you out to things that are no longer in the world. And that's quite a strange sort of period in your life when you're sort of still attached to things that are no longer in the world. And this brings around this idea of kind of almost hauntings, really, when you have a period of time where you sort of kind of perform or make a space for something that's not here anymore, because you're sort of working through the process of understanding the ways in which it's gone and how you make a bridge into the next part of your life. Immediately made me think of one of my favorite books, House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. He has an interesting way of just exploring the meanings of words. He was talking about riddles and how when adults are trying to make sense of the world or to make sense of something in the world that they can't make sense of, if you sort of play with the words and look at the roots, you come to sort of trying to fit the world using reason or arms, like trying to build things to make sense of it or to reason it into something that makes sense. I guess what I'm kind of posing is that there is another version of that, especially when you're trying to fit the world for things that have left, have departed or died, is that you also have creativity, which is a way of making sense of the world. And that sort of brought me around to thinking about how you create very irrational spaces when you're letting something go, which is not necessarily something that's died. It could be just things that have ended in your life, like a job, moving house, something that you can't get hold of anymore, but you kind of spend a varying period of time sort of making a space or a set or habits or sort of communications that would potentially make a space as if that thing could still walk into it, or that person. So you sort of make a performative space where you're sort of allowing yourself to be a bit haunted for a little while. This is a picture of an urban exploration that we did where we went exploring abandoned houses, which I thought sort of was a bit evocative of what I was thinking about at the time. So this is just a slightly relevant idea. It's a portrayal of death by Terry Pratchett, where he sort of visits somebody who is having a near-death experience, says that of course that means inescapably he must also have a near Vimes experience, the person who's having this near-death experience. And I think we do sort of need to sort of basically sit with absent things for a little bit. And that's this idea of being haunted and how we need to kind of recreate things, mimic things, create ghosts. This leads me on to this idea of ghosts as being quite strange things. And it also leads me on to the idea of why I think I find ghosts so fascinating and ghost stories so fascinating, because they're always different. They're never right. Ghosts, when we envision them or create them or write stories about them, I mean, most traditionally covered by a sheet. There's just this completely strange thing, which is almost a perfect example of a secret. But also they tend to be mute. They often speak in riddles. They're often mischievous. Their intentions are really hard to read. And there's a really obvious reason why that might be, which is they contain their own loss. Something that returns to us like that hasn't really come back in a way. It contains the fact of its own death or its own ending. And that's protective, I think, for us, because certainly for things that we don't want to let go of, if we conjure them back, however literally, if they contain the fact that they have gone, that's sort of a part of our brain that keeps us sane in a way. It reminds us that the world has changed and that this thing has moved on. but it also is a really fertile ground for creativity, because we do make things that we re-envision that we've lost different. And the astonishing amount of creativity that has come in around telling ghost stories and talking about rituals and media and images around recreating ghosts, hauntings, and returns of things that we've lost is amazing. And this is just a quick quote here from Robert Frostbaum that I particularly like. He said, "The dead had souls, but when I asked him how that could be, I thought the dead were souls. He broke my trance. Doesn't that make you suspicious that there's something the dead are keeping back?" Yes, there's something the dead are keeping back. But it's just that idea of a secret, of something unknown. And a quick image of crows and cats, which are particularly associated with, symbols of death. Ravens, I think, are known as psychopomps. They're considered to be messengers that will fly between the realm of the dead and the realm of the living and take messages and sort of ferry back and forwards. Cats are just often associated with all sorts of sort of symbols and legends. If they sit on the bed of somebody who might be dying, then that might mean that they're going to pass away soon. They might be seen as a symbol of something, a death coming. And I think it's quite interesting, those two things, because you've got this idea of crossing over a divide and of secret knowledge. And again, a lot of the things, rituals and films and books and stories and symbols around death often have those ideas of secret knowledge and of this idea of this big chasm, this big gap between us and the unknown. And I guess that's the idea that I'm sort of got out of the Upside Down Tarot, is that sitting with things that we've lost is sitting in a place that is very much an unknown space. And I think that gives us this enormous emptiness in which we can create. It's not so dissimilar, I think, from why people find space travel so fascinating, because you have the great unknown, you have a universe, and you can go out there and you can play in it because nobody knows what's there. But what's beyond life is, by definition, much more emotional, much more personal, and just as vast. So I think it's a really amazing space for creativity. And that is broadly the object that I wanted to share. So this is the actual version of my tarot card and upside down. And that was the thought process that I went on with that.
Great. Thanks, Amy. I have thoughts. I'm sure Tassos and Shannon has as well. So I can hear the radars are twitching. So we'll keep that hidden for now. And I'll pass it on to Tassos. Thank you, Amy. That was great. I have lots of ideas. So Tassos, over to you.
Hi there. My name's Tassos, and I am going to share two objects and like a story kind of with each one. And they are both dried leaves. This is like oak leaves, and this is a kind of bundle of dried sage. I'm going to tell the oak leaves story first. So I have a Jedi Master of games and play who it's called Bernie DeKoven. And a kind of a sad circumstance, and I can say, he passed like 3 years ago, like almost exactly actually. And the year before that, he'd posted online that he'd been diagnosed with the cancer that was to kill him, and he was nervous about his legacy. Actually, sorry, I should have at the top, I should have said I have a question that I'm kind of running through this and through both stories, which is like, how are we present after we're gone? Like, in what ways can we be present after we're gone? Bernie posted that he was concerned about his legacy, and I, for my own reasons, I really wanted to have like the best conversation I possibly could with him, and I ended up traveling to North America and to Indianapolis, where he lived, and and we also kind of had this idea that we were going to make a game together, a game kind of like about legacy in broadly speaking, but also as one part of his legacy, and called A Game of Legacy, which exists, and I can share a little bit of that. But basically we spent a week and we sat in a park local to him every afternoon, sat on a bench beneath an oak tree, and we just had this amazing conversation whilst also watching people playing on a set of swings, which were themselves like a bequest from Bernie to the park. Now I think to leap forward. So with the game is a parcel, a huge parcel, and it arrives with a letter that says like, don't open the parcel, not yet, not until you've got friends and family around a table, and then then here's a link, put a screen on the other end of the table, and the screen then plays me and Bernie facilitating people opening the parcel and playing with what kind of like comes out of it, and building something. And it's kind of a cross between, I mean, a set of games and kind of an instructional performance. This hopefully will work, is a bit of what's on the screen at one point, before you've opened the box. So hopefully you can see the hummingbird here, and then
it's visible.
There's I don't know if this is a Hebrew story. I learned it when I was in Hebrew school, but there's this young kid walks by an old man. The old man has a shovel and he's digging, and he's planting a fruit tree. So the kid comes up and says, "What are you doing? You're never going to be able to eat the fruit of that tree. You're going to be dead way before the tree." He says, "Well, the way things work is that one person plants for the next person. You can't really plant a tree for yourself. You plant it for the next person." And I think that is kind of like a very much a legacy sensitivity.
Because that tree over there is probably at least 70 years old.
Oh yeah, at least.
So like you could have planted that when you were 5.
I could have. So majestic.
So yeah, what continues then is as you play, and this was kind of recorded. That wasn't recorded like with a view that this is going to be in the game. That was just I basically recorded all of our conversations, and then later it felt that actually that present moment, that presence, like the two of us, that extended present moment of us sitting beneath the trees where this kind of came from, like talking about legacy, watching people play, felt like actually the thing that was kind of that's the kind of the pivot and the still spot kind of inside the game experience as well. But then what kind of comes out the parcel is much more joyful, like as is kind of like right for Bernie, like in his spirit. And it kind of very last kind of game that we play at the end of it is like what was Bernie's favorite game at that point. It's called the Blessings game. It's kind of game. It's a little kind of contest about blessing each other. And we could play it now briefly, Shannon, like may your life be as beautifully gushing as the waterfall behind you is kind of like right now. So I bless you, and then Shannon, if you like, you can try to outbless me, like to kind of like bless something else to me. Like I'm putting you on the spot there. Do you want to, or do you want to?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
The blessings that I would share and invoke for you would be infinite synchronicities for you and your loved ones this month.
Thank you. We could continue. We could keep, and Amy and Rena could, but like just that game itself actually feels for me very much. It's so much from Bernie, so much of him, and so much of the joy that when we would play it literally for an hour, like batting them back and forth. And there's a little bit in the recording like that kind of catches, and it's kind of the end, and he sort of finishes by giving a blessing essentially to everybody who's playing, which I don't have this. I forgot to prepare to kind of get this down exactly, but it's something like. Basically, may you all play well, like at least as well as you have played today, like, because playing well was like always like sort of Bernie's sort of that, how do we keep playing well was always the big question, like inside his life and his work and his book, The Well Played Game, and all his writing. So I really recommend. So in that sense, in a way of like, how like, as we played that, like I'm feeling myself presently kind of like connected to him and back to this moment kind of as well, and this token or totem that I kind of carrying of that. To tell the other story more briefly, like, I mean 3 years ago was a bit of a year in that sort of Bernie passed, and my own dad had like a kind of cancer that suddenly sort of snuck up, and he died like later that year, like and I was sort of home, my family home, and kind of the more we'd spent like a long time in the hospice with him, and then the night that he passed, we spent that night kind of with him still, and we came home following day, and then spent the first night back in the house kind of without him. And the next morning I went down into the kitchen, and there's like this like little island in the middle of the kitchen that's kind of like a worktop, and there's various things like hanging around like alongside it, like saucepans, like utensils, kind of etc. And there's this like bundle of like a dried sage that was there, except when I go down that morning, it's not hanging. It's on the kitchen floor, like at a distance from the island, almost kind of perpendicular to it in a way that is kind of. And I kind of experimented a little bit. It was impossible to knock it in a way that it would fall and land in that way. And I left it there, and then talked about it later with my mum and my sister, and they hadn't been down during the night, so it's kind of a mystery as to like what happened, as to like why that landed like that. But it also kind of primed a thought that we then when thinking about his burial and his cremation rather, we gathered a small bunch of herbs and like put those like in his hands in the coffin, like, and to go into the cremation. And I really felt I had this kind of this feeling of like, although I'm trained as a scientist and I have that kind of skepticism, I have that also that but what if that is that somehow that is some manifestation from him, some message from him. Like and a friend of mine sort of like told me that she'd been looking after her grandmother for the month before she died, and they sort of are both like Muslim, and there's a sort of kind of belief that the kind of the spirit sort of stays for 40 days or so after passing, and may manifest somehow. And my friend had been sitting with her sister a few weeks after her grandmother had passed, and they were in a room with a bookcase, and a copy of the Quran had literally flown out and like dropped on the floor and kind of opened. And it's kind of into telling her about the sage, they felt kind of akin. Then like later, like that year, 3 years ago, it was my dad's birthday, and me and my mum and my sister kind of gathered together at the house. And later over dinner, they were like, okay, we didn't want to tell you because it might sort of like kind of freaked you out a little bit, but we kind of come down in the morning, and the sage had fallen again, but this time the kind of string had broken, and like it was kind of scattered, like the bunch was done. And then like there was another kind of couple of times where like in that year I never encountered like, this, the fact that, in sage, dried sage, also this is for burning. This is actually part of a kind of a purification, a cleansing ritual. This is not for cooking, like, and I never kind of encountered it in my life before this year. And then like like a month after my dad's birthday, I was at a house party, and somebody kind of came out like, and was like, people were outside smoking, and he was like, hey, I got a bit of sage, like, hey, I want to burn some for you, and just kind of like this total stranger kind of presented it. And then this bundle of sage actually kind of came, I entered like a work tombola, a raffle, and I won a box of vegetables. I lifted up the kale, and underneath there was like a bunch of sage. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, like this is and I went to Athens in sort of December, and I planned. My dad wasn't Greek, despite my name, that comes from my mum's side. But I planned. This was important to him, and it's kind of, he was kind of like, he was in love with all things Greek, including my mum. And I made basically like a little ritual where I sat at the foot of the Acropolis, and I had a bit of this sage, and I had a lighter, and I burnt some. And that felt like a kind of a moment and a kind of a punctuation. And I think I'm still interested in sort of, again, this thing of like, on the one hand, this is a series of coincidences or synchronicities. Thank you, Shannon, for that blessing. But on the other, like, as I am looking to make meaning from this, and I think in the kind of the wake of bereavement, we're always looking, we're kind of flattened, we're kind of looking like, how can we make meaning like from this? And it's inevitable that this kind of line gets placed, but then, there's still the kind of what if, and like, what if there is some other kind of communication and kind of connection like still present after. So yeah. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Tassos. I love it. Like second part of this theme. So let's give it like a third aspect. Shannon, over to you.
Can you see that okay?
Yes.
So destruction is the impetus of creation. This is a story that goes back to 2014. I am living in London, and I have just experienced one of the most extraordinary situations of my career. An employee made a mistake, and in 4 hours, I lost everything, including an excess of 1.2 million in revenue. It was an extraordinary experience that led me to explore alternative ways of experiencing my world. And I am in a workshop, a business workshop, funny enough, sat next to an extraordinary woman named Kirsten Stendevad. She's from Denmark in Copenhagen. And to cut a long story short, Kirsten invited me as her guest to attend one of her leadership programs in Denmark, with which I said yes. And this is a story about the weekend that literally threw me sideways. So I'm going to see, there it is. It's a beautiful city. Kirsten asked me to attend with 14 other women. And she said, would you please bring a collection of magazines? And my mind, having been in the personal development and self-growth space forever, went, ooh, we're making vision boards. So I picked up my Harvard Business Review and my Entrepreneur and my Inc. And I got all my lovely little magazines, and off I went to this weekend that I had no idea what to expect. Now, I had just experienced enormous loss financially. I had just left a marriage of 17 years. I had just been referred to a medical physician in Harley Street, where he would greet me with a comment that said, if you don't do everything I tell you to do, in 9 months, you will be on chemotherapy. I was without health, without finances, without a business, and without a relationship, family. So it was one of the darkest moments of my life. And yet at the time, being somewhat still inspired by the North American culture, in my head it was like, it's okay, I'm going to keep going, I'll figure it out, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I was willing myself to make the next step forward. So here's my magazines, and I arrived at this very open space, which I could only describe on par with the yoga studio. And all these beautiful women from all over Europe were there for this weekend, being facilitated by Kirsten. I was standing in the circle, self-conscious, not gonna lie, put my magazines, which she asked us to, on the floor in front of us, but I put them kind of closer to me because I was like, I don't want the Cosmopolitans and the Vogues, I want my magazines. So I made them within easy reach of me. And she said, you know, throw them in the middle. Everyone kind of contributed. And at that point, there was this drumming music that started to play through the speakers, through the sound system. And she asked us to turn to our right and move in a circle while this drumming music was playing in the background, shamanic drumming music. So I did, and I'm judging it a little bit, but I'm going with the flow. And I figured that on Monday morning, if I didn't like what I experienced that weekend, I would just dismiss it. But while I'm here, I'm in. So the circle continued for probably 11 minutes. And as the music was about to taper off, Kirsten, who has this like caramel liquid voice, came on the sound system, and she asked all of us to turn into this circle of magazines, this pile. So there's like 13 or 14 women times 5 magazines. What is that? 70 magazines. And we were to descend upon them to rip them asunder, destroy them. The stereotypes, the expectations, the way we've been asked to conform to things that we just don't want to conform to, but we need to if we're to fit in. And so as this direction was coming through the loudspeaker and we had reached this internal state of what was being facilitated by this drumming music, there was this force that just erupted, and magazines like bikinis went that way and covers went this way, and everything was just totally shredded. And I remember like the adrenaline that was just rushing through my body in that moment was just so extraordinary. And at some point, there was like this trickle that came through the PA system of birds, water, very soft, very healing type music. And we were looking at like bits of magazines everywhere. And I was thinking to myself, sure, what the fuck was that about? How the hell? Like, what was the purpose? As I invited my mind to just be a little bit more quiet, I thought, let me just see what happens next. And Kirsten's voice came over the PA system. And she said, I want you to walk through the destruction. And I want you to pick up the pieces. And I want you to embrace them and see them again for the first time. And from this destruction, we will make way for creation. Now, that was the moment that I stumbled backwards out of the circle, landed hard against the wall behind me, and fell into a heap on the floor. I cried from the depth of my soul, because this was the first time that I had ever been presented with an idea that all the destruction, the violence in my childhood, the utter death, metaphorically speaking, that I had experienced had a purpose and that it could serve. And I wasn't in a position to hold that in a way that I could be effective at the exercise that was presented before me. And I just collapsed into this seeing destruction and death for the first time in a way that I could use, that I could create from, and that I could play with. So whilst I couldn't do what she asked, I sat with this idea that I'd known from childhood, which is the phoenix rising. And it was a metaphor that I had clutched onto, held near and dear to me, because it was a lovely way for me to attach meaning to everything that had been in my existence up until that point. I wasn't forced to glue pieces of paper together, but I was brought a poster paper and some crayons, and that's what I could muster in that moment. That's a picture from the weekend. And all I could say was, whatever wants to happen now, let it be. It was total, utter surrender to what was, and those are the magazine pieces underneath it. It was the beginning of a new relationship with death for me. The cave, the shadow, the abyss, the darkness. I wanted to understand it more than I had in that week. And I was grateful for the introduction, but I can't even describe the thirst that I had to not just know about this reframe, but to embody it. So I have spent the last few years using nature as a way to understand these concepts, because I value deeply nature as a teacher. And I've found numerous examples. The carbon that experiences enormous pressure and fire over a long, long period of time to become the diamond. The butterfly that thinks it's dying in the chrysalis, only to become its next version, the death before the creation. The canvas, the beautiful blank canvas that becomes destroyed in the process of art and allowing something new to emerge on it. And so I've been in love with the idea of symbols that represent death. And I brought one of my many owls, the predator, night, witchcraft, death, so that I can better embody and step into the death experience, not to be afraid of it, but in the words of Rumi, to show up as the master who sees only transformation, not as the student who only plays in the game of loss and gain. And up until that weekend in Copenhagen, I only saw loss. I was only a victim, but I'm doing pretty good if you knew where I came from. Now I've been able to take what is the darkness that I had spent so long pushing out, and I bring it in, and I hold it, and I embrace it, and I honor it for what it is. One part of a transformation process that makes way for diamonds and butterflies and some of the most extraordinary art that we get to appreciate and see. I'll wrap up with this one final thought. The cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. Thank you, Rena. I'm not sure if I've used up my 10 minutes entirely, but that would be the end of my story.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. I just it's just funny, like I know, like I'm laughing and smiling, but I'm just like grateful because each episode, particularly this week, that the stories are always incredible and a surprise. So obviously, as host here, I don't know what people will be presenting, and we've just been given 3 beautiful examples. Stories about this theme. So Tassos and Amy and Shannon, let's have a conversation.
Allison, or beg your pardon, Amy, I've taken pages of notes during your presentation, and I think I came back to change and the idea of change, seeking something, seeking some sort of resolution. So I really appreciated the content that you presented. And I was just reflecting on, can you have change without a metaphorical death or some version of death? At the moment, I'm thinking you can't, but that was the question that was left with me during your presentation, Amy.
Yeah, I think I think that's an interesting idea, because I don't think you really can. I think there has to be that kind of mourning period, at least, for things that sort of end.
Haunting period, I think, is what you referred to it as, which is so true. Change comes with a haunting period, which means there must be some version of death in there.
Yeah, and I think we need to be haunted. I think it's got a lot of negative press, but I mean, you know, I mean, for your story, which was absolutely amazing to hear. There's just so many thoughts I had about that, but it's sort of, you have to understand something before you can let go of it. You're sort of attached to it in so many ways, and you have to sit with it and understand it before you can know how you're going to move forward from it, I think.
I agree. The haunting is just, I reflect back to 2014, and that haunting period, I think, lasted years in different waves and different forms, but it's just such an appropriate term to use. Thank you for that.
It's such an irrational period as well. Like, I mean, my company wound down, that I was running at the beginning of last year, it was the right time, and that's okay. But after that, I know I made some games, and you know, that was a sensible thing to be doing, is sort of put yourself out there and making things, come play with me and make games with me. But some of them were very much like echoes of what I'd been doing with Fire Hazard, and they weren't all entirely. Some of them just had little pieces of. It's almost as if I was sort of mimicking and performing, still being a part of that company in a way. It isn't exactly what I would have made now. And I think like that mourning or haunting period it's not a rational space, which is not to say it's a bad one, but you have to do some strange things to let go of things sometimes.
The ghost, the mute, riddle, formless sometimes, could be a great metaphor for how the unconscious shows up in our present moment as we transition. That's a big part of death, as we transition from what was to what wants to be, but yet isn't here. So we're kind of like dangling
in
the abyss. So it's a necessary part of the process, while deeply uncomfortable. Deeply uncomfortable, but yeah.
I'm struck by thinking about this sort of kind of, I mean, this period, like the period of an absence and the absence of an idea, or the absence of like a kind of an energy, like
void.
But then that as a necessary precursor for what is to follow, and the kind of like that's kind of present kind of through both of your beautiful sharings. I'm thinking about a couple of points. So like I conversation with another conversation Bernie with that stuck with me a lot, where we were talking about like what is the opposite of play, and he went on this kind of joyful rant about some people think the opposite of play is work, but it's not that, because if you're lucky in moments, or indeed all of your practice, you can find a similar kind of joyful flow that you find in play. Some people think the opposite of work is boredom, and it's not, because often, and I'm really minded of this, boredom is kind of almost like as a sort of an analogous like absence and void to loss. It's of a very different kind of quality and energy, but also how what Bernie was saying also made me think about like experiences I've had, like kind of working as a theatre maker kind of as well, like long form improv, like where often like the very best moments happen after the point where you think, okay, this is done. Everybody has like lost any inspiration. It's all gone, but you have to keep going. And then somehow something is wrenched out, that it definitely isn't conscious, but it's definitely kind of like really responding, and it's really responding and really present in some ways, because that conscious thought has been kind of been scraped away. In a way that I think it kind of coming through grief is often, this feels like it's been just burnt out of you, but it's in that those feelings come. And then And then Bernie continues saying, you know, the opposite of play for him is rigidity, things being too rigid, like both the
of play
is rigidity, rigidness, which I take both as like both the kind of the properties of a structure that is too rigid, without any play in it. We even use that word, like little movement, like for the potential for also for change. But I think also like how we hang on to things and how we hold on. And you know, emotionally kind of like rigid, and that's a property of kind of you know, of grief as well, that we end up like this. We can't, and there'll be something, I guess, in the kind of the timing, like of, and you can only you can only see it like looking back, but I guess for you, Shannon, like through the process you were kind of going through, it just beautifully happened that experience and that ritual landed for you at the right moment, where you might have been like this, but now you were suddenly able to let go, and
absolutely,
and the emotion that comes as you do that.
I love the rigidity angle, particularly as it relates to our ego and our thinking self. If I look back on the 2014 experience with Kirsten, I was deeply rigid in my view of all that shit up until that moment. And then what, if I use your Bernie's metaphor, thank you, Bernie, Kirsten shattered the rigidity in that ritual that took place on the Saturday. And there was a formlessness or a void that emerged before the play could kind of roll in, and I'm envisioning waves on the seashore. The play was able to roll in, but the rigidity snapped, shattered, dissolved. And then there is that transition period before I play now. My work is play. I love what I do. But it wasn't until after I'd gone through the shift of rigidity, transition, and then play. What a brilliant analogy.
Something I loved in both of your talks as well was a kind of a theme of kind of a mystery and an unknowingness, and that wonderful image of the kind of the classic ghost beneath the sheets. Yeah. And I hadn't thought, like, as you put so beautifully, Amy, about the fact that it's a secret. It's a secret kind of embodied, like, and a secret that you can never know the answer to, like. And then what you said, Shannon, about, you know, the kind of the cave that you fear to enter holds your treasure. But the fact is, you don't know until you're able to step into that cave, like, and like what exactly that, you know, you didn't know what was going to be in your cave until you were in there. Like, you just know
demons.
But maybe that's what we fear. You know, we just as we fear what's beneath the sheet is somehow a demon, but it kind of never is.
Is the ghost a metaphor for our unconscious?
Yeah. Sometimes I like it that the whale is just a whale, though. I mean, it's, in a way, I mean, your ghost is what you've lost, and to me, anyway, I think it can be anything, right? But I mean, to me, it's always felt like that's it. It's something that's gone, and it's. Sometimes I think, you know, grief can be a bit of a cage match. I mean, you sort of think you can move forward, but you can't really. And in order to get to the next part of your life, you need to build a bridge. You need to build stuff that will let you get there. And you build that out of all of these bits of memory and grief and ghosts under sheets and things you can't know and secrets. And you need to kind of live with these really strange housemates of these things that you've lost for a bit, and then form something out of all of that. Yeah. And that's playful, but it's a ladder. It's necessary, it's fun, but it's also, you need it to get out of there.
Yeah, but I think I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything there. Like, but I don't think you necessarily leave it behind. Like, that you
transform it into something new,
and something that you're able to hold. I had a thing where I had started making a storytelling piece before, like, the sort of the year of bereavement that I had, and then ended up finishing it like rashly and kind of stupidly, like soon after my dad had passed, and kind of like, and the last story inside it was kind of touching kind of on that, and it was fulfilling a commitment I'd made before, like, you know, the way that you're going to get programmed, like, and then but then put it down, left it, like it's kind of one off. And then the following year kind of came back to it. And I thought I think there's something interesting here, but I have to know also that I'm able to manage this for myself, because I can't put myself in front of an audience if I am still processing, kind of, but in some ways, kind of that this piece was becoming kind of about grief and how, and I figured out, and I had a dream, and this became an image, which I then took into the performance part as a thing that I could share with the audience, which was like that grief being like this ball, like a marble, like kind of grey and foggy that was rolling on my palm. And it was the way, like soon after like death, the death of a loved one and that kind of loss, it's like it's impossible weight. Like it's the weight of the universe. Like a friend of mine had written to me after saying, like in solidarity, like in saying after his father had passed, it was like the skies bent out of shape. And it's like, and I was then using this and like literally the physical gesture, saying to the audience, like, look, sometimes it can capsize me, and like, and the weight can, and that's when, but you don't ever, it's not that you ever learn to, you don't let go of this. You don't want to lose it. You just want to be able to kind of carry it lightly, like in the end, like in bed, still feel the weight of it, but it still is something that you now have with you. It is transformed.
Yeah.
But that bridge building, what you're sort of talking about, Amy, like I think is, and we're doing that irrationally, like often, like, cage matches is a terrifyingly good image.
But it's not too far off. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
No, I think it's over dramatic in some ways. I like the idea of the marble. That's a beautiful way of thinking about that. You do take these things with you.
Yeah. And the meaning that you attach to them will influence its expression in your life. That was part of your share, Tassos, with Bernie. I'm curious to know more about Bernie. I can see that Bernie has birthed this blessing game, among other things. I don't know if there's links that you can share with Rena that can go out with this, but I would love to know more about him.
Yeah.
If you Google, I mean, I'll say this: if you Google the Well Played Game Bernie, you'll find, deepfun.com is his website, and a legacyofplay.net is the website for the game of Legacy and kind of the other kind of like work that I personally did with him.
Where do we get is there any place that has his ideas on play and rigidity? Is that in these sites or?
There's that. I don't know if he wrote otherwise. I wrote down like that bit of kind of conversation, and there's something. Yeah. And if you, obviously Shannon or anybody else is in touch with me like via Rena, I'm happy to sort of share that. Like you muted, Rena.
Yeah, we'll add it on like links. Sorry, that one is a particularly funny joke at the moment with what Amy was saying, the muted ghost who's watching. But I wanted to point on the rigor mortis. I think it's funny because I laughed. It's just really strange that laughter is part of this theme. When Tassos, you said the opposite of play is rigid, the term that popped out was rigor mortis, right? Death is the pose, right? You're stiff. And I laughed because in childhood, when you want to punish a child, you remove play. You know what you tell them? Sit on that naughty step. Don't move. Or on a corner, be quiet, right? No talking, face the wall. Be quiet. No talking, no playing, just be still. And that is punishment, right? And a child is like, no, but I have to move and I have to shout and I have to play. And so they kick up a fuss because even throwing a tantrum is not silence and stillness. So I just laughed at, and then and how so much of growing, and again, talking to some of the students out, Amy, like you mentioned, fascination with death comes in the form of a raven or the black kitten. And how at an early age, the exposure to death for young children is through pets, the loss of your hamster, your rabbit, like your loved dog and cat. and just like this, yeah, it's just that it's part of us, but I think the essence of what the weaving of what's happened with the three of your stories, and maybe coincidentally the theme for next week, because we're teaching games and the game of life, the game of death, or playing, is that being an adult, we're told somewhere along the way that there's an end game, like game over, like that's it, like and then, but maybe not enough of how do we play with that, how do we hold the game overs of like what next. And so I'll just quickly share what the objects that you have shared, which is obviously just they're just, we need to scratch beneath the surface of what you've presented. So I have before me, or before us, we have the Death Tarot card. Tassos is dried leaves, the sage in particular, the ripped pages of magazines, and in terms of, if you put that in a blender, the basic essence of it, which I laughed again, is the cosmic joke of that white sheet. I think as creatives, there's a terror that comes with the blank page of like, what do I do? And there's nothing there, right? There is no life or creativity. It's this blank page. And yet, from what you've shared, the sheets, the lightness, I think Tassos was saying, like it can be heavy or light, the way, depending on volume, I guess. But there's something tactile with what you've presented, all three of you, that it is within our hands, right? The burning, the waving, the dealing of the card, and then like what card do I pick up next? And then even I think what was great about Shannon, what you said about the magazines, there's a flow, right? Turn left, turn right. There's a story that we're meant to follow. And when that doesn't work, you're like how do we? And then it was just nice that you were told to just, we'll rip it apart, change the turn, the page, I guess, and what happens. So for students, and we're all students, what happens next? Like, oh yes, the tyranny of the pen of like, what do we do? We had an episode talking about magic and how this is essentially a wand. So in terms of like, what do we do with a page? But so there's just my thoughts, and I'm just really appreciative of the three of you for teaching the students some lessons somewhere there. Next week we'll be talking about games, because it like naturally lends itself to this theme. But over to all three of you again. But thank you for the stories.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. And Bernie, bless your heart.
Okay, so we can just carry on chatting. I'm just trying to figure out like where the stop sharing this
down at the bottom
button is. Yeah, no, hold on. So anyway, so let's just keep talking. But Tassos, Amy, and any final advice for students of creativity and cultural industries?
My final thoughts.
Well, not final so much as to be continued, but yes, current installment.
Borrows from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay on circles. The series of facts with which you have just embodied, understood, and know to be the fact are just the beginning of an endless series of facts that will fall away and make room for new ones to be understood. Nothing is concrete in what you believe in and what you think you know now. Bring Tassos' idea of the marble and just hold it lightly, your views of the world and how you frame things so that they can be more malleable, and maybe create an opportunity for you where there's no need for a shattering of rigidity, but there's a softer dissolving of it to make way for a new reframed view of whatever it is that's important to you.
Tassos and Amy?
That's very beautiful.
Little breadcrumbs.
That was very beautiful. I mean, sort of a mirror of what you're saying, really. I think that one thing that I've gotten from this and thought as well before is that you need to be kind of irrational when you're letting something go. Like you say, flexible, but being able to be irrational in your play or in your mourning, which is a very different thing potentially, might be a useful tool to see things end and other things begin. So having the ability to do that is good, I think.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it is about giving space to whatever is coming, like, and not whatever's coming from you, as you go through this, and not judging it, and not thinking this is a wrong thing to be doing or to be feeling or to be making. Like, you don't, and it doesn't. I mean, and you sort of have, finding when it's right for you to sort of and whatever you're making, like it's kind of, something will come when the time is right, and it's just kind of like knowing, perhaps because other people have been through this, therefore if it ever feels stuck, it's like trusting because other people have been there before. And I was actually sort of minded, also, I think, I read a book called Wintering recently, and kind of like thinking about winter and kind of the seasons and the cyclicalness, but like kind of winter sort of like both literally and metaphorically as a very necessary part of like the living cycle, like where things die, where nothing much happens, where it's cold, it's frozen, it's kind of rigid. But there's something, I think, in recognizing that will also always happen, and there's a gentleness perhaps that kind of goes with that, and kind of what Shannon was saying, kind of quoting Emerson, and that we that new things will flower, and we're all going through with the pandemic a kind of winter, like we're kind of having to be inside the way that we often, it's like it's a perma snow day, but things will come.
Okay, thank you, Shannon, Tassos, Amy. Some beautiful thoughts and stories. So I'll finish it with a big blessing. So to Shannon, to Tassos, to Amy, students, my blessing is that may life burst out in all its wild glory coming soon, to give us just new energies and the loudest laughter. And play. We are all so willing and ready for play to commence. And may we witness that and be out there soon. Thank you. And till next episode, thank you for joining us on Hot Bananas. And that's a wrap. So that is the latest episode of Hot Bananas. And join us next week for an episode on games and play and why that all matters. So take care for now from the Kingston School of Art.